yeah, I'll get on with the housekeeping stuff, and then we can save the time later for the discussion and questions. So great. Morning, everybody. Yeah, welcome to today's call. It's great to see you here. Just to flag right now, the call will be recorded. The recording will then be uploaded to our YouTube channels and Lumio. So yeah, if you want to go back and check anything that's discussed today or share it with colleagues, then that will be an option very soon. Um, it's going to take the form of a kind of panel discussion. So yeah, not necessarily any slides or anything to share other than our own introductions. But yeah, we'll get moving. Okay, yeah, welcome again. Everyone is joined today for this event between the Energy Learning Network and Ethex. I'm John Taylor, Head of Capacity Building at Community Energy England. The Energy Learning Network is a UK-wide capacity building programme funded by the National Lottery's Climate Action Fund. It brings together the four national community energy member bodies in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, along with Ashton and the Centre for Sustainable Energy. Today's event is going to explore how community-funded solar can turn supermarkets and warehouses into local sustainability hubs, helping them save money, cut emissions, and even let customers share ownership of the clean energy powering the building. It's such a common thing. Yeah, why isn't there more solar up on rooftops and warehouses? Yeah, we hope this is going to be a really big growth area for the sector in the coming years. Today's panelists, we're joined by a few speakers. We have Ben Sharp from Ethex, Mike Smythe, Energy for All, and Dean Hill, the Big Solar Co-op and Share Energy. I'll also be reading out a supportive statement later from the UK Warehousing Association, who couldn't field anyone for today's panel, but are very supportive of this topic, and have got some good resources. Be partnering more with them in the upcoming months. In a few moments, I'll ask each speaker to introduce themselves properly, and then we can have some, yeah, get stuck into the questions, and yeah, hopefully have a really good conversation. We'd also like to make this session as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions, please pop them in the Q&A section, and we'll try and make some time for those later on. You can upvote your favourite questions as well to the top. Um, so yeah, just a little bit more about us at Community Energy England. We were founded in 2014 by our practitioners within the community energy sector to act as your voice, connecting up community energy activity across the country, which is helping putting people at the heart of the energy system. Our membership has grown to over 340 now, vast majority being community energy organisations with some supportive stakeholder groups, corporates and councils. All our work is intended to clear obstacles, create connections between practitioners and stakeholders, and facilitate the work of community energy organisations, thereby benefiting the sector as a whole. We work policy and advocacy to make politicians, national and local governments, network operators more aware of community energy benefits, our needs as a sector, and the opportunities and policy obstacles. This is to ensure that community energy organisations are able to create new projects, play an active and important role in the clean power mission. If you want to find out more about current policy work and activities, please take a look at our campaigns and policy section on our website, which will be linked in the chat shortly. You can see our current consultations and active campaigns, including our new Up the Energy public awareness campaign on our website, and plenty of other how to get going resources as well. And then the Energy Learning Network, that's kind of the umbrella hosting today, is powering forward community energy projects across the UK, helping more groups launch or grow schemes that decarbonise the grid and create instant benefits for local people. The network brings free insights, resources and connections to existing community energy groups, as well as other groups looking to become involved in local energy projects for the first time. It's also creating mentoring and peer learning opportunities to make the most of the experience already in the sector. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, it's a collaboration between lots of partners, and we want to keep bringing more people into that umbrella as well. Great. So let's get started with today's topic then. It's solar on rooftops, supermarkets, and warehouses. I'm just going to start by reading out a statement from the UK Warehousing Association on this, and then I'll bring in our speakers to introduce themselves. So, warehouses are one of the UK's greatest untapped clean energy assets, Today, only around 5% of warehouses have solar installed, and many of those are only partially covered. Our latest analysis suggests that by using only the largest warehouses, those over 100,000 square feet, our sector could provide or generate 17.3 gigawatts of solar capacity, almost double the UK's current installed solar capacity. Deploying solar PV on warehouse roofs can significantly lower energy bills, cut carbon emissions, and contribute to the national clean energy infrastructure. Public support is very clear. A recent YouGov poll commissioned by UKWA found that solar panels on industrial rooftops like warehouses are single most popular form of renewable energy, backed by 9 out of 10 people. That's why the UK Warehousing Association is championing the role of warehouse rooftop solar and community energy in the UK's net zero journey, and why we have published a UKWA Solar Toolkit, a practical guide to help warehouse owners and operators overcome barriers and unlock this huge opportunity. So yeah, we urge everyone involved with warehousing, the owners, operators, tenants, investors, policymakers to explore this opportunity, to use the solar toolkit as a starting point. And yeah, that's exactly going to launch into discussion about how we make that opportunity a reality today. So um, first of all, Ben, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Sharp from Ethex. I'm one of the senior investment managers there. To introduce Ethex briefly, if you haven't heard of us, we are an ethical investment platform. We work with a lot of community energy groups, helping them raise finance, community shares, or bonds for their projects.
Great, thank you very much. And Mike, would you like to say hello?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Smythe from Energy for All, which is a cooperative of community energy organisations which share resources, including development resources, through Energy for All, which is a very cost-effective way of doing things and a way of sharing experience. One of our members is M&S Energy Society, which is a bit of a giveaway as to what it works on. And I was the project manager on that. We were offered 35 supermarket sites by M&S, and we managed to deliver on 8, which gives you an indication that there are barriers even when you have a willing participant. Just a couple of features I'll mention on it. It's a national co-op, rather like Big Solar, as you'll find out in a minute, and that will be one of the features on the certainly if we're dealing with these large multi-site organisations. And at the time, we were helped by Plan A, as it was called, sustainability strategy of M&S being very much at the forefront, which I don't think it is at the moment, either with M&S or for that matter with any other supermarket. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. And Dean.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Dean Hill from Share Energy, who's a mothership that deals with the admin and feasibility studies for multiple community energy groups across the country. And then specifically, I'm the client lead for Big Solar Co-op. So we focus in on rooftop solar and occasional solar meadow, one of which we're doing up in Nottinghamshire on an abandoned coal mine. And we've funded all of that through share issues to ethical investors and also a bond issue via Ethex, which went rather well. We raised £1.8 million on that. And then we're in the process of using that finance and leveraging it with other ethical sources of finance to build out as many rooftop solar projects as we possibly can across the UK. We've gone from 0 to 15 or 17 now since I've been here. And we've got a pipeline of hundreds and hundreds of more. And currently, I'm helping to do a rollout on Mid-Counties Cooperative. And we've had various bits of PR around that, like MPs visiting and generally creating a little bit of noise around what we're doing with supermarkets and other types of sites around the UK. Speak.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so it's great to have some people on the call that have already got some experience in this area already. So I'll start off with, we've got 3 prepared questions and then hopefully some time to bring in a bit more interaction later on. So first of all, considering the barriers at the moment, what would you say is the single biggest barrier preventing supermarkets and warehouse owners from deploying large-scale rooftop solar today? and what role can community energy financing play in overcoming that? Maybe start with you, Mike, with your M&S
Yes,
experience.
and um, you must differentiate between supermarkets and warehouses as well. They're very different. And my focus is really on supermarkets. With warehouses, you've probably got big issues on the grid and on internal use, as well as the other barriers that might exist. It's not one single barrier. Let's start with the good point, which is with supermarkets, they will use 100% of the power you can generate from the roof. There's very unlikely to be a grid issue, but you've got to be careful how the solar array interacts with the on-site generators. And supermarkets won't do it themselves because they will typically look for a return on capital invested of about 20%, and solar doesn't deliver that. But the barriers, we start off, let's say, with the site longevity. There's a lot of churn in supermarket sites, and so they have to be satisfied that it's going to be there for the long term. Then move on to the practical one, which, well, I'll just mention another point first, which is that the sites are very different. So you might have a city centre site, and the issues there, the roof could well be strong enough, but the roof will be cluttered and with air conditioning and other things. And it was also quite likely to be fire escapes from adjoining buildings. That can often rule it out. It might be in a shopping centre. Now there, they won't own it. The roof could well be glazed, have all sorts of issues, and you're dealing there with a shopping centre owner rather than the supermarket. Or it could be on a retail park or as a large standalone equivalent building to a retail park, which is the most promising. Retail parks so often are not owned by the supermarket. Or it might be a convenience store where you get into completely different issues. These might be old houses and things like that, where you can have gables and multi-occupied buildings. We found a big barrier was roof strength, particularly with retail parks. They are built, they call it value engineering. Broadly, it means if you add anything to the roof is projected to fall down. So they are just simply not strong enough for solar, even probably some of the lightweight options which are offered. So that's a big issue, and that's where we lost most of our sites, was actually on the structural survey. A second point to bear in mind is title. As soon as you start working with the supermarket's landlords, dealing with their consents, their bankers' consents, the landlord's desire to extract as much profit out of what is going on as possible, you start getting into a very different situation. If the site is freehold, you've got much more flexibility, but increasingly the supermarkets will not own that many freeholds out of their portfolio. So title's an issue. Governance is an issue. These are private, well, they're typically listed companies, and they will be constrained on entering into long-term contracts. So they might find that there's a rule that any contract over, say, 15 years has to go to get main board approval. And you can guarantee that that's going to be a long way down their list of priorities and getting onto the board agenda. They're centralised. There's 10 supermarket chains for all intents and purposes, absolutely dominate the UK. Their culture is centralisation. They've got a professional property team. They are obsessed with profit. Their margins are very low. So they're not straightforward to deal with. The co-op is slightly different from the others, as that's the co-op, as one of the big 10, is actually a whole series of smaller co-ops, and culturally is rather different from the others. But the others, no, they're not easy to deal with. They might have exclusive relations with contractors, particularly electrical contractors, which makes things more expensive. They can be quite high-handed to deal with, bear that in mind, particularly actually when you want access for maintenance afterwards. And what we do is trivial in the context of what they are. They are about selling food, and absolutely everything else is secondary to that. And for instance, if you need to turn the power off, that's for instance, to get the panels up or to do some maintenance, that's a big issue. They will throw food away if the fridges get turned off for more than a very short period of time, and that then becomes a very expensive operation. So that's supermarkets. Not straightforward. You can see why there aren't more community projects installed in supermarkets. I'll stop there.
No, so that's some really excellent insight. Yeah, it's such a big coordination problem, isn't it? Yeah, maybe Dean, if you'd like to come in and see if, I guess some of that will kind of be
Yeah,
similar
yeah,
to your
sure. I
experience,
mean,
but
Mike has mentioned many of the micro issues that you deal with along the way and covered the big picture as well. I mean, those in my team of colleagues know I love alliteration. I could sum up our issues with supermarkets in three words: landlords, lethargy, and legals. And so, yes, if it's a leased building, whole world of pain involved in trying to get the landlords to engage. That's something that definitely needs to change, and hopefully we'll come on to that later. Lethargy, as Mike says, again, we're just a small part of all of the things they have to consider in delivering food and beverages to a local population. And having your drinks chilled by the sunshine is probably not top of your list, but and nor even saving the planet if we're brutally honest. So trying to keep the issue of when are we going to take the next step to getting solar on your roof up there in the corporate merry-go-round, it is difficult. So that have to overcome a certain amount of inertia there. And also on the legal side of things, even when you've got a portfolio client as we have in mid-counties, because some of them have got different types of ownership, like a pension group might own part of it. There's bank covenants to look at, all sorts of different technical things. Even if they've got a bad roof, for example, and you have to do an in-roof solution rather than an on-roof solution, you have to completely redraft your legals for the fact that your equipment's sitting in the roof rather than sitting on the roof. You'd be surprised that such a simple change can make such a massive difference to the legals. And again, grinding through the gears of that with the the other side's solicitors can sometimes be a little bit complex, take a lot of time. It really takes a lot of effort. So that's the main barriers, I would say.
yeah, the three L's. Yeah, certainly legals is something we hear time and time again on a whole host of projects, but quite so Ben, like financing necessarily hasn't come up as a main barrier, but other than their own internal hurdle rates for doing it themselves, is it something you've come across in ethics?
So it's not something that we come across specifically at Ethex, but having discussed supermarkets and warehouses with colleagues and stakeholders, financing is actually not always a key issue. Mike and Dean have said quite rightly, these are a big national organization that we're dealing with, and they often have the capital. It's just, they are allocating that capital elsewhere. So what we need to do in the community energy space is to make the case for social value and the role and impact that community energy has to play in helping them decarbonize. So in short, we need to approach this from a different angle. I think what Dean and Mike have touched upon, again, quite rightly, is kind of the profit incentive that these supermarkets and warehouses will have. And also, community energy is not as well as a well-known option, as much of a well-known option as other forms of financing, corporate PPAs or using your own capital. It's much more straightforward to do what everyone else is doing. The fact that community energy has not been as prevalent in scaling solar on supermarkets and warehouses is also a barrier in itself. So I think we really need, just to wrap up, we really need to make the case for solar on supermarkets from a community energy angle. But also just lastly, touching upon what Mike and Dean have said, there's often a landlord-tenant split. And Mike, I think you touched upon this previously when we've spoken. With your M&S stores, most of them, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, were you installed solar on those that were freehold rather than landlord. Is that right?
That's correct. There's a couple of landlord ones in there, but they were selected primarily on the basis that they were owned by M&S or by the M&S pension fund, or if they were landlord-owned buildings, they were on long leases, which gave M&S greater flexibility over what it could do with the building than would be the case in a shopping centre, for instance.
And just to touch upon that, actually, I've just got a question for you, Mike and Dean. When you're trying to convince supermarkets and warehouses of the benefits of solar, are you using the argument to say, this might increase your property value, it might increase attractiveness to tenants, if you're showing that you're sustainable, it's going to help your, ESG scorecards. Is that a conversation that you're having, or they are not interested in that at all at the moment? What is kind of the outcome of those conversations?
I've been quite virulent, if that's the right word, on this, and every landlord I've spoken to in the course of my travels with Big Solar Co-op, I've stressed the point that at some point in the very near future, tenants will only want to lease buildings that have clean green energy. It's simply the case. And I think, in preparation for this, I mentioned that the EPC changes that are coming along will help a little bit with that. But right now, landlords aren't focused on that. They are focused, in the truth of the matter, again, pure capitalist profit. That's what they're in it for. That's what they're doing. And the phrase that crops up within the first paragraph of any opening conversation is what's in it for us. If we can come up with models that do involve something for them, that's perhaps something worth looking at. In the supermarket scenario, we're obviously solving the capital problem because the supermarkets have got high electricity usage, and our power purchase agreements address that in terms of a funding mechanism. On the warehouse side of things, it's very often that a warehouse, unless it's highly mechanized, will have very little on-site usage. So our power purchase agreement is less valid in that scenario. So to have to cut in something for the landlord as well is almost impossible within the model that we have currently.
Yeah. So it's almost we need a mind shift change with the supermarkets and the warehouses. And you're saying, Dean, I guess that maybe mandating it from the government would be helpful. We're not getting that mind shift change organically.
Yes.
We were lucky with the timing with M&S because they had their plan A. They were very focused on environmental issues. That is less high profile now for them. But as a result of that, they actually had a team working on sustainability issues, and that made an easy way in for us. But also, this is only one pretty tiny contribution on their sustainability agenda. So sourcing of goods and the like was actually far more important and far higher carbon emissions. They bought their Regos, so they were at least to that extent responsible for sourcing green energy. And so what we did made a fairly modest difference, but the timing we were very fortunate with the timing, and they were very committed and went to a lot of trouble to enable the project to happen. We hoped that we would have been able to promote the M&S project more widely, both in the shops and also to the staff. The HR team at M&S put a blocker on us approaching their staff. They felt that if an M&S branded community energy product, as it were, was promoted to their staff, they would be duty bound to underwrite it if we screwed it up and lost the money. So that wasn't allowed. But they were actually supportive, both in us having pop-up stands in their shops, and they did actually at that stage have M&S Energy, I think it's called. It was their own brand of electricity supply, and we were included in some of their marketing, so that it was supported to that extent to try to get to those customers. But it was a bit low key, possibly for the same reason that this was not their priority.
Yeah. No, it's interesting on that point about the convening those partnerships. I think that's where potentially us at Community Energy England can play a role in having that national conversation with the equivalent head offices to raise awareness of what community energy is as a solution and then help them cascade that down through their store network. I was in a lecture the other evening with Professor Tim Lang, who's very big on food resilience, and he did include some statistics about the architecture of our supermarket and food system. And it's something like, yeah, across those 8 or 9 big retailers, they have something like 12,000 stores and convenience stores,
Mm.
but they conversely only have 130 distribution centers. So in terms of energy loads, I was having a conversation with someone at Sainsbury's. They were saying it's possibly their distribution centers that might have the better energy opportunities in terms of mass refrigeration and logistics hubs, especially if they're looking to electrify some of their delivery fleets. Um, so yeah, but yeah, interesting what you said earlier about that kind of failure rate of how many sites got whittled down to actually being viable. Um, I was also talking with a company called Solarvus recently who specialize in lightweight solar panels, like in sodium, telluride panels as well, rather than silicon. So I don't know if there's a kind of engineering solution to overcome that weight problem. Is that something you've looked at?
Um, the technology's improved since we did it, but
Mm.
the loading margin we were finding was broadly non-existent. So, I
Okay,
mean, it
not
did
even.
vary from store to store, but with the
Mm.
modern shed type stores, there was nothing. You know, they have to allow for snow, they have to allow for people to walk on them, and there was just nothing left over after
Okay.
that. It was everything was really cut to the bone.
Mm.
And where we were able to install, in particular on these sort of modern sheds, was where they had built in some extra resilience because they might want to hang things from the roof, um, air handling plants, or possibly a mezzanine floor, and they hadn't actually done that. So
Mm.
that area of roofing was then available to us.
Great. Yeah.
Hmm.
Just to underline that, we looked at an NHS warehouse in the northwest where they were storing medicines, obviously chilling. And because it was in an area that frequently got snow, because of the snow loadings, they could either have sunshine and solar or snow, but not both at the same time. So we're
Mm.
unable to look at those. We have looked at stadiums and some of those lighter solutions, but the truth of the matter is that either the solutions aren't really quite market ready yet, but the less expensive end of the spectrum, and the ones that are market ready are really expensive. So again,
Mm.
you're kind of overloading your PPA and
Yeah.
increasing the cost for the client.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and there was a media studio that we looked at, and the roof would have been fine for solar, but they'd already hung lots of stuff, some audio visual equipment from the inside of the
Oh,
roof,
interesting. Yeah.
which were then ebbed into the loading tolerances, so we weren't able to do solar for them either. So, yeah, so there's a roof strength issue
Mm.
in a
Yeah.
lot.
So many factors to consider there. You mentioned PPAs, and I'll move the conversation on. Thinking of time. And in terms of what's in it for the host buildings, so presumably it's the PPA, it's the electricity is a big part of it. So what does the ideal community PPA look like for a supermarket or warehouse, and how can we ensure it delivers value not just for the retailer but for customers and the community who want to invest in these projects and co-own the solar on the stores? Dean, do you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we've looked at this in some detail as Mike has, and because the sites vary in their nature quite considerably, and there is that risk of will this site continue to be a supermarket or will it move a different group? Our PPA, if we were to look at it by by case basis, building by building, it would vary anything between sort of 11 pence up to about 17 pence, which is still a really good range because the supermarkets themselves, again, depending on the size of their group and the buildings, are paying anything from 20 to 25 pence, usually at the lower end or perhaps a little bit lower for the bigger supermarkets. So we're giving them a really, really good cost saving. But what we're having to do is to simplify things is give a portfolio price. And so for mid counties, we agreed one price for all of their buildings, the big ones and small ones. Unfortunately, for strategic reasons, they had to move some of the larger ones out of the portfolio. So that meant that we had to recalibrate a little bit. And if we do go on continuing the rollout down into the smaller buildings, we will have to ask them to pay a slightly higher PPA. And then their insurers were insisting on some quite considerably high levels of O&M and monitoring, which meant that the PPA had to be adjusted, but we're still able to give them a really, really big cost saving against their grid electricity. So in general, when the usage is there, even on the sort of the mid buildings and upwards, then there are massive cost savings to be had. So it's very attractive to the supermarkets. It ticks a box for them without having to deploy the capital, as we talked about earlier. And then, yeah, there's that community engagement aspect. And similar to Mike, we've got ambitions of doing a campaign with mid-counties. Once we've done 12 of their buildings, we've done 5 so far, and there's another 2 going in, to go to either the staff or the co-op members or both. We've done a little bit of this by mail shots, but maybe giving it a bit of a local focus. So we took an MP to the Stroud branch, and we started the process of trying to get community engagement to invest in more solar. But it's something that does require a big marketing effort and the buy-in at the broader level of HR and the communications people within the organisation. So that's probably a bit more of a mid to long-term project after getting the solar done. But yeah, the PPA model works really, really well for supermarkets. It's obviously the high chilling that happens in their food and beverage areas that are there means it matches well to solar.
Yeah, and it would be a fantastic thing to have that reach to all the shoppers and have that presence in so many communities around the country and make the public more aware of community energy as a thing to invest in as well.
Yeah, I think something that might help that is that we're talking to an outdoor centre it's the Shropshire Hills Discovery Centre. We're talking to them about putting a monitor in reception. A lot of our clients are asking about this, and mid-counties that want to do this at their HQ, but they haven't talked about their supermarkets, of actually a branded monitor. So we work with Big Solar Co-op to power this with green energy. Here's what it's producing now. Little tactical deployments of those kinds of things will help with that engagement and get more investment from the communities, I think.
Yeah, is it similar for you, Mike?
Yes, on the PPA side, I would add it is about price. They will not, in my experience, want to pay any more than they are at the moment, and they do get some of the best electricity prices in the country because they are very big power users. And secondly, you're quite likely to be in competition with the commercial sector, particularly, and it was mentioned on the distribution hubs. Certainly there, they tender that out, and M&S went to commercial leasing providers where they have tax advantages compared to community energy. So that can give them a lower price, but that's very much a tendered option. Individual store level, there's perhaps greater scope for us because they're harder to deliver, and when they're harder to deliver, the commercial sector is less interested in the delivery side. But the commercial sector also will typically be offering a leasing model rather than a pure PPA approach, and that's something you need to be aware of in pricing.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Ben, any perspective for that? Or we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, just briefly, again, this is more Mike and Dean's domain, but just touch upon what Dean has said and following on from that. At Ethex, I think we would see the best value for customers if we were defining them as a community of interest. So often with community energy, we're thinking, as Dean said, local. It's a local project for local people. But when we're thinking about national supermarkets and warehouses and organizations, and if we want to scale up community energy, we have to start thinking about community, not just as a local thing, but as something you can take part in if you are engaged or with that organization, or if you're interested in what they're doing. So at Ethex especially, we're looking at always raising finance from a national investor base. So for us, engaging customers is not just about engaging customers locally, but engaging customers around the UK, and thereby, you know, engaging and unlocking more finance for these bigger projects as well, which is what is needed when you're looking at, especially warehouses where they're going to be a megawatt, 5 megawatts in size. You definitely need to unlock that greater national investor base.
Mm. No, that's a great point. Yeah, we don't always have to raise all the money from a very small geographical footprint. There's a very supportive investment community out there and that want to make these projects happen. Um, so yeah, in terms of making things happen then, so yeah, we've heard only 5% of UK commercial roofs currently have solar. If the sector were to, yeah, really punch higher and push closer to, say, 50%, what coordinated actions from retailers and community energy organisations, investors, government, maybe, yeah, new GB Energy would be essential to unlock this national opportunity? Yeah, Ben, would you like to maybe start with this one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So 50% is very ambitious. Um, I think, John, as you said at the very beginning, if we only looked at the largest warehouses, 100,000 square foot and above, we'd be hitting 17, 18 gigawatts, which is the size of the existing, solar PV installation across the UK. Um, but again, I have a consistent theme across this discussion. Um, the key thing is to scale, and if we want to scale, then we need to um, think about aggregation. We need to think about pooling resources. I think Mike and Dean and John, you probably agree with me when I say the community energy sector in the UK is quite fragmented. If you were to go across to Europe, it would be a lot more. There's a lot more consolidation.
Mm.
There's great benefit in fragmentation. Obviously, it means it can be hyper local. You can engage on a really kind of person to person level, um, but it also means there's a lot of learning that is happening all the time, with new groups popping up who are doing projects for the first time. So there's always
Mm.
kind of a beginner approach with a lot of these groups. If we were able to, unify groups or projects, we could amplify that community energy message to these, again, big organizations. As Dean and Mike have found out, you're taking this to a board level when you're discussing installing solar PV. You're not just talking to a supermarket and the head of the supermarket. It goes beyond that. So to have that credibility, I think it's important to have a think about how groups can come together. Also, if we're going to reach 50% or, a larger percentage than 5%, we need to think about attracting institutional investment, other sorts of capital. If we're consistently raising 1 million, 5 million, 10 million for these big portfolios, that's not always possible at a local level or even a national level with a retail investor base. So I would say if we were able to, again, aggregate these projects into larger ticket sizes, that would be much more appealing to institutional investors. At the moment, Mike, I think you mentioned this previously, a supermarket on its own, it might be 250 kilowatts on the roof. You could say roughly £150,000, £200,000 for that project. That is not going to attract an institutional investor. We need to pull these projects together to enable to unlock that kind of institutional investment. So I'm going on a little bit. I just also say one of the ways to do that is maybe to look at a pooled investment fund. That's something that we've spoken a lot about at Ethex. I know there are some things in the works, but it takes a long time to create pooled investment funds. But that is one way of unlocking further investment. Lastly, just with regard to government, we spoke about this before, but Dean, you mentioned EPC ratings, require higher EPC ratings, hopefully encouraging deployment of solar PV. That would be really welcome from the government. Mandating solar readiness for warehouses, for new builds. As Mike said, one of the key things is structural. Structurals often fail. They're value engineered, these roofs. If you put a feather on it, it's just going to collapse. So if we can ensure that new builds are structurally sound or supportive enough for solar PV, that would be really useful. And thirdly, I would just point out, as everyone on this quiz probably aware of, not crowding out community investment, private investment from these opportunities. We've seen, I think GB Energy gave out 250 million pounds this year for schools, NHS sites, military sites to deploy PV. That is not necessarily helpful for the growth of the community energy sector when we are trying to crowd in our investments. So ensuring that the government is supporting but not completely taking over these projects or financing these projects would also be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. There's some really good points there. And yeah, I know there's things like the National Savings and Investment Green Bond, and yeah, like the sort of volumes of investment we're talking about, it's kind of premium bond levels in terms of public awareness. So I think there's definitely potential for, yeah, the government to help crowd in more retail and community investment into these schemes to amplify the growth of all this locally. Yeah, Dean, would you have
Yeah,
like to come in?
there's so much to go at here. I'm going to try
Mm.
and constrain myself to some most positive points. I think in terms of the issue we've got is that there's not enough top-down determination. And when you've got corporate landlords, you're not going to get any action at all from them, really, unless it's mandated. This EPC thing helps, but it doesn't really go far enough. In terms of the funding, we spoke to the National Wealth Fund recently and said, well, what if we aggregated our portfolio, maybe a couple of other portfolios? Would you be interested in funding that? And the answer was, yeah, if you've got 50 megawatts, let's talk about some aggregated funding. All we're really interested in at the moment is powering data centers. And we're working with the big corporates to do that and pouring our resources into that. So that's not an option at the moment. I think one thing that would help in terms of aggregation is some form of collaboration matrix. But bear with me on this. So, for example, Big Solar Co-op, we're national, and we're very conscious of the fact there's lots of community energy groups out there in the country. We don't want to tread on any toes just out of general politeness, and B, we don't want to be putting in loads of parallel activity and competing with people. So there's a tennis club that we handed over to Bristol Community Energy because it was on their patch. There's a warehouse, a dockside warehouse down in Portsmouth that we handed over to Plymouth Community Energy because it was on their patch and it was a one-off warehouse that they could deal with. But for the bigger things like a chain of supermarkets, that really does need to be handled, in a centralized way, because we do have a place with supermarkets. It's, Sainsbury's are already doing, they think they're putting 16 megawatts already, and Tesco's about to embark, if they haven't already, on a 3-year rollout, and they're doing lots of sleeving. But for their small and middle-sized supermarkets, we could add a lot of additional benefit nationally to their portfolios if, we said, okay, that's the kind of project that suits a national community energy organization. And then other projects like community centres or a small industrial estate, that's something that suits the local community energy group because it sits within their community. There's no centralised decision making. It's decision makers on the ground, and just figure out where we're best focusing our energy. So I think the answers lie in top-down encouragement by government for organisations to actually take some action, and specifically landlords, and then some bottom-up, more joined up thinking from community energy going, well, these projects over here, they'll suit you down to the ground, off you crack.
Mm.
Leave us to these ones, though, because we've already got a conversation going on. Why would we compete against each other? And a national organisation doesn't want to be talking to lots of fragmented groups. They want
Yeah.
one solution, basically. So I don't think we should compete with each other. We should really work to our strengths collectively, and do that in a kind of a more matrixy kind of a way would help.
No, thanks, Anthony. That's a really great concept, actually. I like the sound of that. And certainly, yeah, there's not universal coverage of community energy across the country yet at a local level. So, yeah, having you as a kind of way to build that capacity and, yeah, look at filling those opportunities and then, yeah, grow people's confidence to take on projects locally would be a nice way to
Exactly.
approach it, I
And
think.
we're very happy to be a delivery mechanism in areas where there isn't community energy, where there's like a nascent group that haven't got they're building themselves up from the grassroots. They've got some enthusiasm. They know some of the decision makers, and we've done a little bit of that in Derbyshire, and then stepped back a little bit because they wanted to look at other solutions, and we've done that in other areas where we've delivered a site and it's encouraged some activity. In Forest of Dean, for example, we did a sort of a treasured hotel there, and then that community energy group has gone on to fund itself and incorporate, and is doing lots of mainly smaller and middle-sized projects with the same area. So it's all, collaboration and encouraging the sector to grow.
Yeah, great. And Mike, this is very much in line with your ethos, I'd imagine, as well.
Yes, I mean, I'd agree with everything which has been said by Dean and Ben, and particularly with supermarkets. They are centralised. The big 10 have central property teams. Tesco's regional, but their region is the size of other people's national. And yes, they are. That the local stores don't really have any influence at all. In terms of 50%, I think it's an unrealistic target. To be honest, it would certainly require a lot of regulation and improvement in the technology and longevity of lightweight panels. But we're talking, in many cases of buildings which are, even if they were strong enough, they won't have the grid connection. So this is a big issue with warehouses who have substantial probably roof strengthening work, but on top of that, you'll have very substantial grid charges. And dealing with the title is a nightmare, and how that will get resolved, I don't know. I don't think there's any willingness in government to mandate the changes that, apart from on the EPC level, which they keep deferring, which would actually make that much of a difference. Something else to bear in mind is that the commercial property landlords have a lower requirement on return of capital than the operating organisations do. So they're far more likely to fund it themselves. And there's been some mention of some of the supermarkets doing this themselves. I suspect they're working with finance leasing houses on this on a fairly large scale. And bear in mind, so city centres are often just unsuitable for any sort of solar. Very costly to put up. The roofs are always cluttered and used by, as I say, I mentioned the need for fire escapes from adjoining buildings and things like that. It's hard to deal with city centre sites. Quite often the buildings are tall, but all those issues too. And we're having to do this cheaply. But the big advantage of warehouses, if the roof is strong enough, then it's usually cheaper to put solar on a warehouse roof than it is to build a solar farm. So there is that advantage, which is worth looking at, because you'll be looking at exporting the electricity in most cases. Okay, if it's refrigeration in there, then that's superb, but most are ambient temperature. And then you need to export.
I'm hesitant.
Mike, this is where sorry, Dean, was that you? Do you want to go?
Yeah, I think we might have been about to mention the same thing. I'm hesitant to inject it because I don't know enough about it yet. But the
local energy,
the P441 and the P442, that's really going to unlock warehouses, especially where there's a massive roof. And as Mike says, you can build a solar farm on a roof. But what you're going to do with that electricity? There isn't sufficient usage under the roof. Then P441 unlocks distributing that to the community on the same substation. And Energy Local, God bless their souls, they've led the way. The first time I heard of that, I thought, this is the future. This is the future. Local energy networks and taking the load off the grid and balancing things locally and power to the people and all this kind of stuff. And it's been so hard for them. And if P441 looks as if it goes through, I know P442 is already there, but and it's complementary in a way. But if that goes through, that really will unlock a lot of warehouses, I think, on the face of it. But Mike probably knows more of that. And Ben, you were going to refer to it, weren't you?
I was, yeah, but I was going to say the same stuff, Dean. So I think we're all in agreement. Local energy markets would be really useful.
The budget, though, has reduced the attraction of it. So bear in mind that the changes, the removal of some of the changes which under P442
the
have to
levies,
pay into general taxation has meant that certain of the financial savings that the P442 route, well, both routes were offering, are not there for domestic customers. So far as I can tell, they haven't changed for commercial customers.
Yeah.
And Ben, what's your take? I know that they've sidestepped this for now, but what's your take on if any future government brings in a meaningful local energy pricing mechanism and thereby making community energy less competitive?
Help me understand that a bit more, Dean.
So there was a lot of talk recently, I think, particularly from the head of Octopus, of sort of why not use the power where it's generated. So there's a massive wind farm in Scotland, sell it cheaply to local industry at a much lower rate than you would sell it nationally, for example. Does that pose a danger to what we're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for us, it's all about increasing the attractiveness of the project to our retail investor base. So we have around 30,000 retail investors, normal people like you and me, not institutional. And for us, it's really the cost of capital that projects, organizations are looking at, balancing that against a return, being given out to investors. At the moment, we're kind of seeing a return that is attractive to our impact orientated investor base, i.e., investors who are not just looking at a pure financial return, is around 5 to 6%. So anything that increases the cost of capital to the organization and therefore means margins are shrunk, and that kind of rate of return of 5 to 6% to a nationwide investor base is made more difficult, is going to reduce the attractiveness of the proposition to our retail investors. It might be different, Mike and Dean, with your investors. But for our nationwide, who are less local, who have not grown up with the project as much, that kind of rate of return has a bit more importance when they're assessing where to put their money.
Yeah. Sorry, I just have, we're at the time, we've got a few minutes left, and I'd like to cover some of the points from the Q&A. I would just say that from my point of view, that limiting rooftop projects to where you can only sell 80 or 100% of the power to the host building is really what's limiting rooftop solar, and having that local supply ability to get a better value for the exported power. And it's a great story as well if people can know that their energy tariff is linked to the supermarket roof down the road. They're getting bonus nectar points by buying a share in it as well, like tying it all together. I think there's so much potential here. And yeah, it's Christmas season as well, isn't it? So we've got all the supermarket Christmas adverts. Maybe we can aim for next year, the Waitrose campaign, to have a community solar project featured in their advert somehow. But right, yeah, a few minutes for the Q&As. Let me just have a quick scan. So Cara Naden's made a point about the structural issues, and is that something where somewhere like the UK Warehousing Association could come in to fund structural assessments or improvements, or kind of help filter the sites that are able to be prioritised, like in terms of efficiency? And it sounds like a decent idea to me.
So they are effectively a lobbying organisation for warehouses across the UK. Claire Bottle is a brilliant CEO. Claire's CEO of UK Warehouse Association. And she raised the profile of solar and warehouses a lot, but it's not. I'm not sure that they are able to necessarily fund that type of work.
Mm. Yeah, we'll have to revisit that question, I think. But yeah, that's one of the barriers. There's also a point about the insurance costs in terms of viability and risk. Is that something you take on as partners, or is it something the supermarket takes care of, or the host building?
In our case, we normally ask the host building to do so because
Mhm.
it's considerably cheaper for them to do so. I mean, we're talking about maybe £100,000 worth of solar on a building, which is many millions. So it actually makes no difference to the insurance cost at all.
Mm.
The only insurance we would normally take is public liability, which is very good value at the moment. The and also, if you've got a portfolio approach, you don't necessarily need to insure.
Okay.
So, and it's wearing slightly different hats. Schools Energy Co-op, for instance, with over 100 sites nationwide, we ask the schools to add it to their insurance. We know quite often they never get around to it. But when you've got over 100 sites with solar on, you can take the risk of losing the odd set of panels from fire or a storm. What you
Mm.
can't take the risk of is the panels falling off and injuring someone, which is where the public liability insurance comes in.
Okay.
A bigger issue, I think, is more the requirements of some insurers in terms of what sort of maintenance regime they insist upon if they're to insure the building which has solar panels on it. So that becomes of interest to the host building. And some of the requirements are really, I mean, they're expensive to comply with and are frankly absurd.
Mm.
But that's the world we're living in. They're very much focused on fire prevention, but have no
Yeah.
sense of risk evaluation. Um,
Okay. I'm afraid I think I'm going to have to wrap the conversation up here a little bit. I'd just flag a few of the comments in the chat as well about, yeah, helping navigate the right contacts. There's potential to work with warehousing landlords and business parks to help find the right people to talk to when it comes to leases and tenancies. And then there's a great question about supermarket car parks and how will that link in with electric car charging. I think that deserves a whole webinar in itself, to be honest. That overlay between, yeah, yeah, community energy and EVs but yeah, definitely potential there. More expensive, but better ability to sell the power too, perhaps. Want to thank all our speakers for their time today and thank you for listening and contributing to the chat and the conversations and questions. Just to flag a few events that are coming up at the moment. We're also involved with some Seeing is Believing tours with the North East and Yorkshire Hub, where we're taking people out on site visits to visit community energy organisations and projects to see them working in reality, talk to the people who are benefiting from them. We've also got a partnership with Ashton and Centre for Sustainable Energy called Community Energy Go, where we're providing free pre-application funding advice and support. So pairing people up who are bidding for funding with experienced practitioners in the sector to help put in better quality funding applications. And in terms of dates coming up, yeah, we've got, as we're a membership organisation, yeah, new member intro call coming up in the new year. And then we're going to have events like this coming up in the new year as well. Going to have one focusing on our community wind projects and prospects for growing community wind in England again. It's the missing piece in the Clean Power Plan, and the tools we have, like that Vote Wind map, to help people find sites and bring in some experts to develop that. But yeah, do send in future topics, and our Up the Energy campaign is live at the moment. Do support that and donate. But yeah, round of applause for Dean, Ben, and Mike for their contributions today as well. So thanks, everybody.
And we'll try and answer all your questions. I know we haven't been able to get through to them, but we will answer them over email separately.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, if you're not a Community Energy England member, do take a look at our website and yeah, and consider joining. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John.
Yeah.